Go.
Right, off I go. This is one of my mother's later dictations on health, and it's not what you think. So I'll start to read it. This was, she printed this out on the 29th of November 1983, and it's a complete understanding of health for modern humanity. In most recent times, many people have made their fortunes by writing books claiming to have solved the riddle of complete health. Different ways and means of keeping slim and youthful for the maximum number of years, or claims of an infallible method for simply maintaining perfect health. Keep fit and live to 100 years has been the claim of some. But in truth, none of these claimants has the complete answer. I'm not sure I want to live to be 100 anyway. In this book, For All Humanity, we shall first and foremost ask everyone to look into recent and far distant history, the history of this world's humanity of all races. Why, one might ask, should this be necessary for an understanding of health? The answer is simple enough, because health begins at the moment of conception, and even before this, with the mating of parents whose offspring must become future generations. What indeed is humanity, consisting of so many different types of people of all different colours and races, some of them now today so mixed after manifold intermarriages continuing down the centuries, that entirely new types of people have been created from basic few types of people of all colours. How is humanity created in the first place? Darwin was so nearly right, but he did not understand that constant reincarnation of all living creatures throughout the universe is the secret, the key to all understanding of the creation of life. Scientists, peering down their microscopes in the modern world, making sometimes very complicated experiments, are still baffled by many things of extreme simplicity, and we intend that simplistic understanding must be written down so that everyone, even children of 10 years or so, can read the book and come to common sense knowledge, which is the only thing that can save this particular humanity before it goes ahead and destroys itself. All these scientists know perfectly well that some of the earliest types of life are in the form of amoebic types of creatures which divide and subdivide and live in small colonies. They do not consider often enough that it is these types of living entities which are the very first stage in the long, long road to the creation of mankind himself, and often used in other things like the white blood corpuscle, or maybe the beginning of jellyfish. When planets begin the long cooling process after their formation and water and slime begin to develop, this is the very beginning of the formation of life for that planet. All creation of life must begin with and within and around water, and all living bodies are made of more than 2/3 water, including that of humanity itself, which is a very important fact to remember when considering health. One thing which is constantly forgotten is that all living creatures belong in family groups, or little herds, each member dependent upon the other. Dogs, cows, pigs, horses, and all others too numerous to mention. Even fish in the sea are safest and happiest together in groups, led in the case of the more intelligent higher animals by a fearsome male who protects his herd and keeps guard over his females with whom he mates. Being the strongest and best of the males, his genes maintain the strength of the new offspring born into the herd. Until his strength failing, he is either killed by his predators or dies fighting off other young males anxious to take his place as leader. All these creatures are the raw materials from which humanity itself springs, all dying and being reborn constantly into their various types of creature, until in the end, until in a thoroughly computerized way, after possibly millions of lifetimes, beginning perhaps with the first thinking forms of stinging insect, which must calculate how best to trap and ensnare their prey, it is these that most often progress through all the different animal forms to humanity itself. Walt Disney was perhaps a cleverer man than he knew, as he so often tried to choose an actor who had something of the look of the animal character he was portraying. The long, thin-faced animal will eventually become a long, thin-faced type of monkey, and so also within all other types of face, from round to square to all humanity, as all humanity passes through the monkey before emerging as a thinking human being. You have in all races those who are most happy in water and swim easily in childhood, and those who never really feel happy in water and can never learn to swim, no matter how hard they try. Those who are happy in water are the people who most likely pass through the frog and lizard evolution, and there are very many others who do not. You have in humanity those who feel at home with horses and who have possibly passed through the horse types of animal themselves. Cats, dogs, and in fact all four-legged intelligent creatures are only the precursor for mankind himself. Birds are different and rarely, if ever, do other than live and relive again as the lowlier members of a living planet. They never become man, as neither do fish, excepting those very intelligent whales and dolphin types of creatures. And in another dictation, I've mentioned that very often the entities of birds are used as little microorganisms in the body. Anyone who thinks of wild and violent dreams he or she has had, or inexplicable fears that they may have, terrible dislikes of some substance or type of place, must come to realize that these are perhaps born out of some horrific death experience, perhaps even millions of years before in some incarnation, if not as a human being, but as an animal. Why is nature so cruel, so often people ask, as they keep a poor pet chained up and overfed in their homes, or a poor caged bird stuffed with food, which in its boredom and loneliness pecks out all its feathers and dies eventually miserable and lonely? Caring people all too often, in total ignorance of health and creation, refuse to eat meat, fish or fowl, as a revulsion against nature's cruelty and man's inhumanity to the animals that are slaughtered and devoured every day. Horrible, they all cry, trying to live on nuts and vegetables, all too often with disastrous results. All creatures devour each other, usually in such a way that although it looks quite shocking on television films, the victim barely knows what has happened to it and will be reborn again, often very quickly, to fight another lifetime. In this way, nature develops speed of thought in all creatures, which must think fast to avoid capture. Even quite lowly creatures must find a way to feed themselves, and in doing so develop increased powers of thought as they evolve slowly from one lifetime to the next. The lowliest types of man are the deepest coloured ones, set in the wilderness where it is hot and impossible for the white man to live. Often he is happiest tending his animals, nomadically wandering the plains of the earth, or setting up simple shelters and keeping close with his own clan and taking joy in their company and the births of his offspring. One thing that doctors of the past have asked themselves over and over again: why do these people who are so simple give birth with so little difficulty, whereas the more advanced civilized white races living in towns often cannot give birth at all without obstetric help? The basic plan of humanity is that in his earliest incarnations, he will live in the wilderness in small family groups or tribes, guarded over, as are the lowlier animals of the leaders of their clan. These sorts of people are usually gentle and find pleasure in the simple tasks that keep them alive, their customs and their little celebrations, and are really seeking for nothing more in life, but they are fast disappearing as modern civilization crowds in upon them and persuades them that they must travel to other countries and try to live in cities and towns where often there is no work for them. They are separated from their own people and customs and end up living in the poorest and meanest sort of lives. Actually, here, I'd like to mention that Idris Elba, who I think is a wonderful actor, is going back to Africa, and he is intending to make films about some of the marvellous tribes in Africa. and their customs and the way they live. So many of whom, we don't know about, but a few things we've seen which have been so inspirational to us, and we've felt, I hope they don't get ruined by Western civilization. And anyway, I've got some other things to say on that, which I'll say at the end of the reading. Had this message been given in the 17th century, perhaps a more caring, knowledgeable civilization would have protected these people, not only from other races who quickly descended on them and turned them into slaves, but their own kind who sold them in whole villages, sentencing them to a lifetime of almost intolerable cruelty and privation. How many of their own wicked leaders would only be reincarnated through their own genes into that self-same slavery that they had cast others of their own into, thereby reaping the rewards of their own wickedness? Not all mankind can work, and it is not desirable that they should. The task of growing crops, planting, reaping and harvesting, and the caring of animals that mankind lives with and from, has a skill of its own, and all races apply these skills at a different level. These tribal people should live very many of these types of lifetime in this way, gaining in experience and skills, until it is considered that they are suitable to move on, to be given a few more gifts, and eventually become members of a more advanced race until they are ready to move into one of the white races and take their place in a more complicated society. In this dictation, we hope to explain how humanity is meant to work, and how in interfering with the natural order of things, mankind, through ignorance and folly in matters of race alone, destroys himself in the end. In the main, you have the darkest black races who slowly evolve through the paler brown-skinned people found in the Middle Eastern countries, and eventually in some parts of southern Europe, always with sallow skins and dark brown eyes. Only the most intelligent people progress, and the same applies throughout the whole of the animal kingdom. This progress of humanity is a very slow progress, taking millions of years. Trouble with race always begins with man's ability to travel, to discover new countries and strange peoples who sometimes worship vicious gods. Mankind is warlike, and this in itself always leads him into trouble, unless such a message as this guides him into using his warlike nature for gain and progress instead of war. So we must come to history, and how that history has already led mankind to the destruction of the racial way in which he progresses and is born from one life to another. Let it be understood first and foremost that reincarnation cannot take place excepting from man's own seed, and that both parents must have the correct genealogy to bring a certain child into the world. Birth is not a haphazard occurrence, where any two people can just produce a child by the fusion of an egg and sperm. The power of loving passes from the father to the daughter, and from the mother to the son. How often do sons resemble their mothers and daughters their fathers? Sometimes a man or woman's seed will pass down 3 generations before the great-grandfather or grandmother is born again within his or her family. Sometimes it may be a former lifetime or family passing down alternatively for 5 or 6 generations before the original donor of that seed lives again. My niece, her second daughter, has my colour, dark skin and red hair and brown eyes, and I think maybe she's my route back. Look at the enormous variety of types and sizes of men. They come not only in all colours, but in all sizes and structures, and it simply has never been understood how these structures and sizes have a tremendous bearing on human health. Within a simple clan living in the wilderness, a clan that without transport can travel only short distances, they remain together and they mate only with each other. So you do not get a very small person mated with someone who is totally different in size and structure. How famous is the saying, opposites attract? Perhaps they do, and without knowledge, how many poor women in past centuries, before obstetrics was as advanced as it is now, went to horrific deaths trying to give birth to a child by a man altogether too large for her. Or, and this is another important point, a man whose body worked on an entirely different type of impulse or frequency, because let it be understood also that the human body works almost entirely upon the pulsating types of electrical signals emitted from the human brain, and this principle applies to all creatures. The brain emits these signals even from conception, so that a new infant will begin to move in a certain way as its brain dictates. Where the mother pulses in an opposing way, the rhythmic pattern of the birth itself can be seriously upset, positively even causing the death of both mother and child, or the death or brain damage of the child. Nowadays, children are born with greater success because of the tremendous advance in medical skills, which can seek out danger almost before it has happened. But not so very many years ago, in England and Europe, very many young women died trying to give birth, and often in desperate agony. In my family, we have the rhesus negative blood, but not all of us have it. So it is starting to cause trouble, because rhesus negative usually means that somebody's heartbeat is much slower than those without, and they have a lower body temperature and often very much lower blood pressure. So the mix of that, particularly in the past up in Derbyshire, before they had the anti-D, which stops the rhesus negative mother killing her child across the placenta, because her blood will fight with the rhesus positive. A lot of children up in Derbyshire, where an awful lot of Vikings went, developed cerebral palsy or died. So, and it causes, I believe, also problems with epilepsy and petit mal, all these kind of things. It's something we should really start to look at. We don't look at it enough. There are also people claiming to have great knowledge and memories of previous lifetimes who state that unborn children simply fly around the world looking for parents to give them life. That such ignorance should continue into this modern century is a sad reflection upon the government of your planet that has allowed its living people to remain ignorant for so long. Let it be understood that all living creatures exist on two structures at once. In the creation of a living body, both in man and in animals and reptiles and insects, two bodies are created simultaneously. It will possibly be that in centuries to come, some scientists may find it possible to create a living body within some sort of plastic membrane or sponge-like structure, fed with the serum-like fluids that embryos live upon, but it will never be possible to create a complete human being of any race, excepting within the womb of a living woman, thereby creating the two structures simultaneously in a way so mysterious and complex that it will be quite impossible to understand in its entirety. And one of the reasons for this is that when a woman is carrying a child, she will be giving that child and both parents will give a layer of brain cells to that child, but also her intelligence and her way of functioning is given to that child. You're not going to get anything from a plastic bag. In relating the former, we are trying to say that not until there is some real understanding of how humanity is created and why we are meant to exist in different races and to play an entirely different part in the whole human story, can there possibly be an entirely different, healthy humanity. What is the point of a tremendous message which will cover the replanting of the surface of a great deal of this planet, new and even greater technology than you have now, and a marvellous world for everyone to live in, if people remain as they are now, ignorant of the most important things that make life worth living, which is not only human diet? True knowledge must begin with the right parents who will bring very much healthier and better children into a future world. And in another dictation, I've mentioned about how really we should know much more about our families, and that also we should all carry a very carefully designed identity card, which not only carries our blood groups, our electrical frequency. There are 9 or 10 electrical frequencies. And ways to find the right person. Apparently all men give off a signal. And a woman can tell if there's a possibility with a man within 10 seconds. And you recognise people you've known before. So wouldn't it be lovely if we could all meet the right person, the person who is absolutely the other side of them? How much happier and how much healthier would our children be? Where are we going with this now? So in considering human health, one must consider the appearance of all the differing people that everyone can see moving about in any public space. Short men with large torsos and very short legs. People with short faces and enormous noses, altogether too large for their face. Small eyes too closely set together on top of a very long, thin face, and a tiny chin tapering away underneath. Large feet and hands on a relatively small body. The combinations are endless. And why? Everyone knows about children who were described as being mongoloid or born with Down syndrome, as it's called now. Autistic children. Spastic or suffering with cerebral palsy. Children born deaf, blind, disabled or hopelessly crippled. All these things must be accepted in the modern world and cause terrible distress to the poor parents whose lives are often ruined by the care of these poor children. For Christian people, it is the Holy Bible which is supposed to be the Word of God. This divine being who looks down upon his foolish peoples and gives them a few words of comfort and instruction. Since the Bible was written down by a few leaders of ancient Roman Church nearly 3,000 years ago, after Christ had lived his short life and died so horribly, mankind has drifted around this world, usually in little caravans of people, settling here and there and eventually mating with whoever he could find in the almost unpopulated world of those far-off times. Rulers in Roman times and during the Greek civilization were despotic. There was no such thing as justice, and any poor family might be seized by the ruler and their sons sent off to fight for some war he knew nothing about, or forced into cruel and killing labour. Building some temple he cared nothing for either, facing capture by what passed for government in those times. People would load up their families and animals by night and slip quietly away until they felt safe in the new place far, far away. In fact, my parents were very friendly with somebody who was very dark, Spanish-looking. And he said that his family had walked into Ireland with soldiers, servants, everything. Huge number of them had walked into Ireland to avoid the Spanish Inquisition. So that just goes to show, and they've settled there now, and they all have Irish names, but still look very Spanish. It's quite obvious that at some time long ago, possibly 15 or 20,000 years before Jesus came to this planet, some terrible natural disaster occurred, causing storms and torrential rains of cataclysmic proportions. Devastated. I'll start that again. It's quite obvious that at some time long, long ago, possibly 15 or 20,000 years before Jesus came to this planet, some terrible natural disaster occurred, causing storms and torrential rains of cataclysmic proportions that devastated the earth and destroyed a very large number of the then population. Hence the legend of Noah's Ark, which, although obviously untrue in itself, is in some sort of history told by the mouth from family to family down through many centuries. In fact, all civilizations seem to have a flood myth. From the evidence within your planet, we believe that the most lovely place for habitation must have been India, where once a very advanced and modern civilization flourished. In the north, to this day, there are fair-skinned Indians, but the further south one travels, the darker-skinned and even black Indians are found. We believe that a race of white people with red or blonde hair and grey-green eyes or light brown eyes once existed. Excuse me, with all the varying types of colouring you see in the European races today. and once made up the rulers of the India of that time. Earlier they must have been forced to take to boats long, long ago, possibly arriving after months of drifting across swollen seas and rivers, after horrific storms, bringing what animals and possessions they could salvage from the wreck of their homes. They most probably came from places that are now known as Norway, Sweden, Scotland, parts of Europe, England and possibly Spain and Italy. The ancient Greeks must have arrived, and the Romans were all members of some previous civilization, seeking somewhere to settle. Where are they now? Let it be understood that the colour of race is very similar to the colour in a paint pot, and any intermarriage between white and yellow, brown or black will always result in a paler brown skin or a paler yellow skin, and in the end an entirely new type of person than the original. In parts of France, Italy, Spain, and all the Mediterranean countries are pale brown races with pale skins and brown eyes. These people have intermarried with some of the taller white races, and you have today the hodgepodge of this planet's humanity. The trouble with mixing the races is that we are all designed to work on a certain frequency, and our blood groups are of a certain type. So when we mix it up, you mix terrible health. I reckon that I have a black ancestor go back, maybe to the late 1700s, and it's put terrible health into my family, even though I'm sure that ancestor was a marvellous person, but he wasn't really a matching set with my Somerset relations. As things are now, the situation is not totally impossible, but in the future, with new technology, cheap and easy world travel, the situation for all races could become totally impossible. And when total intermarriage begins, the resulting mixtures eventually has to be destroyed. People who, in ignorance of the real, whole truth, marry someone of a totally different race really have no idea what they are committing themselves and their future children to, not to mention their own ancestors who would not wish to return half Chinese or half black, and in most cases could not return in such a body anyway. It is intelligent humanity with complete knowledge and a thoroughly advanced and modern world that creates the human bodies in its children. And if these bodies are wrongly structured, then without talking about good diets and exercise, you have poor material to work on. Apart from race and colour, there is also the question of structure and the question of blood types and nerve impulse types also. The human body is a machine, an extremely complicated one, and impossible to understand in all its complexity. But there are very many simple facts with the far greater understanding given to absolutely everyone, and some simple experiments which we hope will be carried out to aid your medical services in the future. If humanity is all mixed up, it is often impossible for reincarnation to take place, unless there is a previous family from a previous lifetime that in its slow progression can bring someone destined to live another lifetime back into the living world. People of all races must come to understand that intermarriage between the races causes terrible unhappiness and hardship in the end. Life has to be lived not only on this physical living structure, but on our structure, which is the other side, the non-physical world, if you like to put it that way. All people belong in their own family clans, and if they produce children that do not belong anywhere, and this continues on, then very often these very mixed race people who do not belong to any clan and have had physical bodies that have had to endure such illness as a result, must have their non-physical bodies dissolved after their lives are over, and the entity or spirit that is that person, instead of going on to the rest planes with their family members, has to be stored away or sent to another part of the universe until that person can be found another life to live. Now the reader will ask, what are they talking about? Dissolved. What is this talk of two bodies? Think of the human sperm from the male and the female egg, which must join together to create a living body on two structures at once. These egg cells are absolutely minute, and the seed of an enormous tree, once fully grown, is also very small, and everything in nature resembles everything else. All life can be reduced to something so minute that it can only be seen through a microscope. Who or what designed it, and how does this come into being at all in the first place? This is the question that people ask all the time without getting a particularly satisfactory answer. Let us attack this question now in this dictation on health. We believe that humanity is the healthiest in body and mind if it has complete knowledge, and if it stops believing once and for all in fairy tales, religions that have their manifold uses in an ancient world and an ignorant world, full of people who have barely come to understand the full use of the horse and have developed nothing whatsoever, must have religions that guide them to goodness, and that is for the want of a better explanation. Must be what God really means, an imaginary entity representing ultimate good and all these things that humanity in its various lifetimes strives to achieve. Thus all the various religions have got their gods or leaders and their saints who represent to them living people who have achieved the extremes of personal sacrifice and concern for their own fellows, and who represent something almost beyond and above all other people who do not. What or who, people ask, creates humanity in the first place? How do you go from the empty planet which is ready for life and populated in the first place? There must be some sort of God who invented it all. All that we can tell intelligent people is that in this enormous universe there are billions of planets. Some of them must have an entirely different timescale to these little planets like planet Earth. Within them, they possibly have larger and more intelligent beings beyond this enormous universe, and are without doubt other universes, possibly even more wondrous and mysterious than is this one. Life of all kinds, types and sorts slowly evolves from the material which makes up rock, earth, air, water, and the various chemicals, some of them remarkably simple, and which can be found within these elements. Life and the extraordinary electrical force which forms it, like the human body, is all electrochemical in concept, and once created cannot be destroyed. All planets are governed by a governing body or council, many of whom are often in disagreement. With an almost fallow planet, their task is to populate it somehow or other. If they have to wait for nature to take its course, they themselves will have to have had their own bodies on this structure dissolved and be sent off elsewhere long, long ago, and long before they ever see their planet come to life, as it were. How do they do this? The reader must ask. How can they make a fallow planet come to life? They can wait as evolution takes place. This can take millions of years before the first simple monkey-type creatures are formed from the combination of the entities of smaller and larger animals in any planet. In the very first message given to the writer, it was stated that work goes on without cessation. Work must go on throughout the universe, and part of that work is to create humanity. Why bother, some unhappy people might say. All I do is work, eat and sleep, and all I can look forward to is coming back after I die and do the same all over again. And what is the point? I might as well be thoroughly unhealthy, enjoy the things I like, and die fairly young. Who cares? These are the sentiments of many who have no religion to help them, as they can no longer believe in them. They have families who they do not particularly like or respect, very little wealth to live on, and you might say thoroughly uninteresting and unhappy lives. We live, so we are, is our sentiment. So let us make our lives worth living. Cast out ignorance and the desperate poverty, ignorance and unhappiness of the past, and come to the joy of living, which can be considerable. In the past, the ordinary citizen had indeed almost nothing. If he could not earn enough to live upon, he would starve to death, both he and his children, unfortunate enough to be his. Travel was impossible for him, and in the very first message given to this lady, it was said, now you have the means, where any message can travel the length and breadth of this planet in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye. Not so very long ago, everything had to be horse-drawn by clumsy, uncomfortable wagons, and even those were not available to everyone. People had to stay within their own villages, within their own families, or they might very well starve to death in an extremely hostile world. Long ago, if he were black, a man travelling far from his tribe might very well be clubbed to death or killed so as to be eaten by some other tribe. For safety, he must stay with his people. Let those who say that life is not worth living think of pleasant holidays, swimming in warm seas, beautiful foods of all kinds now becoming available to everyone, lovely gardens, and very many people enjoy gardening, glorious music now available to almost everyone at the touch of a button, entertainment now in every home, in our opinion watched too much and too often. These are but few of the pleasures available to all. Living people never stop to consider all those things which are extremely pleasant, especially those who commit suicide and do not know what they are committing themselves to. No one, as it says in the Bible, in the New Testament, has ever come back and told anyone what being dead is like. In this book, very many will do just that, and everyone can know all about death, life after death, and everything else that needs to be understood. Once more to the original message, all those things that we shall explain are simple. Those things that cannot be understood are best left alone. Mysteries there are, and there will always be, and it is best to leave those things that are inexplicable alone. What or whoever created this universe and all the pulsating life within it is impossible to explain, and there the matter of God must rest. Beyond this planet there are other planets, and in various places throughout the living parts of the universe there are centres where information is received. All planets are watched, and new planets ready for habitation are constantly being searched for. Travel around this universe, and it must be understood, all of which is on two structures as far as we are concerned, although it is possible that there is another third, fourth, or even fifth dimension that we know and understand nothing about. They do not concern us, so do not let us think about those. Travel between planets takes an awfully long time, and it will never be possible for anyone, however skilled in creating spacecraft, to travel very far. Even then, without a complete understanding of the movement of the heavens in your immediate vicinity, no travel with any degree of safety can be contemplated. So far away are some of the planets that no living person who undertook such a journey would ever remain alive long enough to get there. As we on our structure can live up to 1 or more 1,000 years, we can and do, and often we must, undertake long, extremely boring journeys in spacecraft, constructed on the principle we have described already, to seek and find other planets, and it is this work which is and must be the only way life is created and progressed on living planets, all following a very special formula which slowly helps to evolve mice, snakes, lizards, etc. in other more advanced centuries. Now you have scientists who experiment with living matter. In other planets they do the same, sometimes with horrific results. Let us say now that other scientists do not create robots out of steel, nuts and bolts. They have long ago given up that useless idea. Some mechanical device with an electronic brain, as described in the fantasy films you have today in your planet. There is much in creation which gives great cause for concern. How can a simple mouse-type creature become, in the course of, say, 1,000 years, a fox, or some sort of dog, or even a cat? We can say to you only by various means of electrical charges brought about by the male sperm. Consider once more the creation process of all creatures. The most strong and adventurous sperm reaching the female egg and combining to form a new body, complete with eyes and ears and brain, feet, legs and hands. All living creatures are exactly the same. Scientists from other planets have discovered that it is perfectly possible, using male sperm of one sort or another, from carefully selected lowlier and less intelligent races, and scientifically fuse them with some sort of ova under laboratory conditions, and then insert the result into a host creature, for instance a pig. In fact, some of the space programs are showing that human women are being kept in some terrible places where they are sedated, but they are being used to bring these terrible creatures to life. Anyway, they're saying here a pig, but the pig will only give that creature a certain intelligence, which probably won't be enough for them to use the resulting progeny for anything very much. Anyway, in the fullness of time, the creature will evolve into a creature which will have enough intelligence to perform simple tasks without revolt until it becomes old, when it is destroyed, hopefully painlessly. Any creature which is not what is required is destroyed immediately. We know quite definitely that some of the half-mouse-like creatures, no more than 3 feet in height, that have been described coming out of spacecraft, that have been seen on your planet, must be some of these scientifically involved creatures. This work is had to have been done in complete ignorance by scientists from other advanced planets, but planets that have never had any particular message given to them, as we intend to give this important message to your planet. And also I have to say that according to what my mother was told, that some planets have been doing this for so long that, you know, they believe that if they don't allow these creatures to mate, then they bring them to full term artificially, then it won't damage it. But it has, because once you create some sort of a life, it goes back into the partially computerized way that life is formed on a planet, and that some of these planets have then found that they can't actually, their women can't give birth. And if they do, they produce a monster, because they've so messed up their life-giving, which is why so many of us have been taken. In the beginning then, once a rocky new planet begins to cool down and form green slime, which is always the beginning of life, water, earth and air, and all life must evolve together, as all things live dependent entirely upon each other, and the first amoebic creatures slowly develop. There is nothing to develop higher life but a very slow process of evolution. If such a planet is found, then this is done constantly all the time. It is found then that the basis for life can be taken there by people from our structure, and this is done constantly all the time. If it is found by people from another planet, they will sometimes take life there themselves and keep an eye upon that planet. Should their population become so large that they will need another planet in the future for their excess population. Unfortunately, all too often, when this happens, they will dump their unwanted peoples upon another planet, their yellow, black and brown races, hoping to leave their own planet all of one race, which in itself can cause destruction of their own people, because humanity cannot progress without there being people of all races, hopefully all living side by side and progressing slowly and evolving as they were meant to do in peace from one lifetime to another. I've mentioned that I've put a little codicil in another dictation. This is my comment. My mother was told about these little creatures that have been artificially created by scientists. I think I might have just repeated myself here, by our scientists in other planets, which is an abhorrent crime against creation. I remember when I was at school, it was reported in the newspaper that a scientist had fused a pig ovum with human sperm, and that it had started to grow in a test tube. There was an outcry, and he was forced to destroy it at 8 weeks. But suppose, with greater knowledge, he had managed to bring that poor creature to full term, what sort of a monster might he have created, and what sort of suffering, both mental and physical, might he have been forced to endure? We have all passed the same way, evolving from amoeba-type creatures through various lowly species, but becoming more complicated with each incarnation. When the entity has become complicated enough to be male and female, and mate together to produce their young, each parent gives a layer of brain cells to its progeny. But in this way, the brain slowly develops, with a creature becoming when a creature becomes too developed to remain within a certain species, the entity of a male and a female is fused together to go forward to join a more complicated and clever species, the sex of that combined creature being decided by the very complex computers that exist to control creation. In this way we progress in understanding, intelligence and humanity, our character becoming more complex as we progress in our ability to feel emotion. Anyone who keeps a pet comes to see how they work things out and learn from us, and often display very human emotions and reactions to events in their daily lives. We have all progressed in this way, all creatures being a combination of the fusion of many different creatures and their characters and life experiences. The final stage is some sort of ape. All races evolve from the creatures that belong in their country. The chimpanzee is reckoned to never be more intelligent than the average child at 2.5 years. At the end of this incarnation as an ape, the entity of 2 male and 2 female will be fused and go forward to become the first stage in our human progression of lives. Our bodies are multidimensional. Your nose represents all your chakras, 2 more places for your heart, and also the equal and opposite channel for your autonomic nervous system. These pass upwards into the forehead to become the 3rd eye, which passes into the hypothalamus or eye of Horus, and is your means of perception in the world. Your ears also represent the whole body, as do your hands and feet. These little artificially created creatures have not had the benefit of many lives and incarnations to develop emotions and proper understanding. But nature always gives us enough rope to hang ourselves with. So once a life has been created, even though its genitalia have been removed and it's never been allowed to attempt to mate, the entity after death goes into the life-giving computers of that planet somewhere. Consequently, in our nearest planet, where this has been going on in secret for many centuries, the human beings of that planet have been finding that they can no longer have children, and those that have been born are monsters. Hence they have been looking to experiment with us to find out why we can have children. It will be noticed that all the representations of aliens that we see have almost no nose and no ears, and no digestive system. For those of us who have been experimented on in this planet and have undergone some sort of alien abduction, they also demonstrate they have no emotion or compassion either. These human emotions are developed in us over many thousands, even millions of years that we have developed in our many incarnations. Let us hope that these terrible experiments with creation are not going on here, but for many centuries it seems that the men and some women in successive governments have failed to realize that they serve the public and are there to create order and help us to prosperity and happy lives. And that's the end of that. My nose is itching.